Some say Manchester City's 2012 title was simply the result of money. But the truth is harder to accept. Before lifting the Premier League trophy, they had to learn how to win in silence, learn how to endure, and learn how to believe in a gamble the whole of England doubted. When Roberto Mancini arrived in Manchester, he did not bring flamboyant football. He brought discipline, the cold-blooded edge of Italian football, and the belief that titles are not created by controlling the match, but by controlling the moment. While the league was swept up in pressing and relentless tempo, Manchester City chose to wait. They did not suffocate opponents for 90 minutes. They needed only one moment. A surge forward from Yaya Touré. A towering header from Vincent Kompany. A piercing through ball from David Silva. And then, the match was over before the opponent even understood what had happened. This was not the team that controlled the most. It was the team that finished with the greatest precision. But the question was that foundational gamble enough to transform them from challenges into champions? Or was it merely an illusion inflated by money? When you're ready, we step into the next chapter. Mancini's tactical system, the true structure behind the gamble. Before Roberto Mancini arrived, Manchester City was still a name living in the shadows. For decades, Manchester had one owner. Red ruled. The parades, the trophies, the European nights glowing under the lights, all belonged to Manchester United. On the other side of the city stood a club sustained by hope and doubt. When the era of big money began after the 2008 takeover, England viewed Manchester City as an artificial project, a giant wallet, an ambition without tradition. But the Premier League then was not ruled by a single force. It was a period where the power structure felt almost cemented in place. Manchester United under Alex Ferguson remained the absolute centre of authority. Chelsea had grown accustomed to buying and winning. Arsenal preserved their possession-based identity. And every title race began with the same familiar question: who is strong enough to overthrow them? City were never seen as the answer. Their supporters understood the price of history. Seasons drifting in mid-table. Years of relegation. Derbies where hope lasted only the first 20 minutes. Money can buy players. But it cannot buy memory. And it certainly cannot buy respect. When Roberto Mancini arrived, he stepped into a dressing room full of talent, but lacking structure. Full of ambition, but short on collective resilience. City had stars. But they did not yet have a system cold enough to survive England's long war of attrition. It was a strange moment. An old generation of power was entering its final years. An empire showing its first cracks. Yet still strong enough to crush any challenger. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. An era was nearing its end. The question was no longer whether City had money. It was whether they had the nerve to step out of their own shadow and dismantle the power structure that had dominated the Premier League for nearly 2 decades. There was a moment that changed Manchester City's history. Not in the 94th minute. Not on the day the trophy was lifted. But when Roberto Mancini decided City would stop chasing glamour. He lowered the defensive line. Compressed the space between the units. Turned the 4-2-3-1 into a disciplined structure, almost Italian in the heart of England. That was the turning point. From a team rich in attacking stars, Manchester City began learning to defend like a block of steel. At the centre, Vincent Kompany was more than a centre-back. He was the emotional spine. The guardian of the team's spacing. The voice in the dressing room when pressure tightened. In front of him, the double pivot protected the structure. And when a breakthrough was needed, Yaya Touré was unleashed. Not a classic number 10. Not a pure defensive midfielder. But a tactical weapon. He moved almost casually. Until he suddenly accelerated. City did not dominate possession to overwhelm. They controlled tempo to wait for the precise moment Touré surged forward. and within the narrowest spaces of the Premier League's unforgiving landscape. David Silva became the brain. No flashy dribbling. No frantic pressing. Just passes slicing through defensive systems at exactly the right time. The rhythm of matches began to shift. City were no longer the biggest spenders. They became the best defenders. Fewer goals conceded. Fewer spaces exposed. Fewer mistakes made. And while England still believed titles belonged to the team that dominated the most, City proved something different. You do not need to control 90 minutes. You need a structure strong enough not to collapse, and sharp enough to strike when opportunity appears. It was not the most beautiful football, but it was championship football. And that foundation, not the final day drama, was Mancini's true gamble. But every solid foundation comes at a price. When Roberto Mancini built Manchester City's tactical structure, he did not only change how the team played, he changed how they were perceived. And England never stays silent in the face of change. First perspective, it was necessary maturity. Some analysts believe Mancini did what City were required to do. The Premier League is not a place for tactical naivete. You cannot win with attacking talent alone. You must control space. Endure pressure. Win even when you are not at your best. They argued that this disciplined structure allowed individuals like Yaya Touré and David Silva to maximize their impact. City 2012 were not the most flamboyant, but they were the most efficient. And in a ruthless league, efficiency defines power. From this viewpoint, Mancini did not kill attacking identity. He weaponized it. Second perspective, it was pragmatism that drained the spectacle. Not everyone agreed. Some journalists and traditional supporters felt City under Mancini were too cautious, too reliant on defensive structure, too calculated. They asked, if you possess superior financial resources, why not build a team that dominates through overwhelming play instead of waiting for mistakes? To them, the foundation resembled a concrete wall. Solid, but emotionless. Some even argued that City's victory marked the beginning of a new English trend. System over inspiration. Calculation over explosion. And that sparked a deeper debate. Was English football evolving, or losing part of its soul? Between those perspectives lies an undeniable reality. City won through structure, but they also ignited debate about how a champion should play. So the question remains, does a strong foundation always equal the right football? Or sometimes, to build a dynasty, must you accept being misunderstood? Some say Manchester City's title was merely the result of money. But in hindsight, what remains is not the financial figures, but the structure Roberto Mancini left behind. He did not build a team to entertain for one season. He built a foundation so they would no longer fear. From a group once shaken by pressure, City became steel that knew how to wait. Vincent Kompany became the symbol of discipline and resilience. Yaya Touré, the perfectly timed tactical punch. David Silva, the mind operating in the tightest spaces in England. This was not the team that controlled the most, but they controlled something greater. The decisive moment. And once that structure stood firm, the balance of power in the Premier League began to tilt. Manchester was no longer a city with one voice. The league no longer belonged to the old order. What Mancini built was more than a title. He laid the first brick of an era in which Manchester City were no longer challengers, but the new standard. His gamble was not in the 94th minute. It was in believing that a foundation strong enough would eventually find its own moment. And from that day on, whenever City walked onto the pitch, they no longer carried the weight of the past. They carried a legacy. Because sometimes, power does not change hands with an explosion, but with the quiet sound of bricks being placed exactly where they belong.